Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director General, distinguished guests, including many of my distinguished senior colleagues from the Ministry of External Affairs, and others who have served our nation in various capacities, particularly in the field of national security. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be present amongst this audience to launch this document that is the result of a unique collaborative effort between the Ministry of External Affairs and the Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis. We live during what has been called an Asian century. This term was actually coined by some scholars outside Asia, but today the appellation is used mainly by Asians. Over the last few decades, Asian nations, including India, have launched themselves along high growth trajectories that have led to a discernible eastward shift of global political and economic centers of gravity. This has increased their weight and profile in international relations and enhanced their capacity to influence global events, hence this new slogan. But this has also created unprecedented challenges for policymakers and strategic establishments that have now to grapple with difficult and often unfamiliar problems. One is the need to put in place policies and measures that make the trajectory of high growth sustainable over time. Historical experience would suggest a degree of caution in accepting the very optimistic projections of continuous growth. The second is the need to deal with an inevitable backlash when this kind of a shift in power takes place. Shifts in the global balance are not necessarily welcome to those at the losing end, even if they lose only in relative terms. The determined effort to choke our growth through environmental norms and regulations, I would suggest, is one such example. We also need to consider whether the upsurge, which is generally now called the Arab Spring, and the changes it could bring to the oil markets in the future, who would be actually affected most by it? Would it be the traditional centers of power, or will it be the emerging centers? These are challenges that cannot be overcome by any one organization. Multiple strands of thought, multiple perspectives, and multiple courses of action have to be taken into account and woven together into composite solutions. India's neighborhood, the challenges in the next 2 decades, this document that we have launched today needs to be viewed in this perspective. I believe it is in many respects a path-breaking document that is the first output of the MEA IDSA Strategic and Perspective Planning Research Group. This group itself is the product of a sustained effort by MEA and by IDSA to draw upon the best available talent to peer beyond the immediate policy and time horizon. In this report, independent researchers, as you were told by the Director General, with the full support of MEA and IDSA, have made an effort to what lies, in military parlance, on the other side of the hill. The intention is to focus attention on the challenging policy environment in our immediate neighborhood. The intention is also to provoke a debate, and hopefully a lively debate, both within India and beyond its borders. We hope to generate ideas and solutions. We hope that we will be able to think, as they say nowadays, out of the box. Mostly, we hope that this debate will allow MEA to find ways to strengthen in practical terms its forward-looking and proactive approach to engaging with our neighbors. The promotion of a politically stable and economically secure periphery is a paramount foreign policy objective for India. This is essential to deal with the challenges of fostering sustainable growth and to ensure that regional differences cannot be exploited by those who would be happy to see us absorbed in these disputes. We have been hard at work in fostering interconnectivity and mutual confidence in multiple areas, in promoting trade and investment, and in trying to leverage India's rapid economic growth into win-win arrangements with our neighbors. We are also conscious of the currents of globalization and of the need to take advantages of global trends in the political economy. We believe that common South Asian interests must factor in the policy-making process of South Asian nations. A South Asian economic union, which is often spoken about, is possibly just a distant dream. But even an expanded set of economic connections will not only transform the economies of South Asia, but will be a force for political stability. I would be stating the obvious in reiterating that there are very few areas of the world where the benefits or logic of regional cooperation are as obvious as in South Asia. But it is also a fact that there are very few regions where the challenges in creating the structures for regional cooperation are so daunting. This places South Asian problems in a peculiarly difficult position. Even as we attempt to surmount the challenges that history has imposed upon us, we are being called upon to confront a new generation of problems, the problems of the 21st century. For example, the difficulties in demarcating borders are now accompanied by a completely different set of issues that arise from the growing irrelevance of borders in a globalized world. Demographic trends are producing a South Asia that is young and has high expectations. We talk sometimes of the demographic dividend, but a government which is unable to meet high expectations could find a dividend turning into a demographic nightmare. Governments that are unable to cope with the kind of expectations that are being thrown up will turn their nations into fragile or weak states that will create challenges of the kind the international community is already struggling to cope with. The dividing line between terrorists and transnational criminals is disappearing, and access to technology is increasing the dangers that they pose. Even as South Asian nations struggle to bridge their internal digital divides, they now have to divert resources to foil cyber criminals who operate in a virtual world. One of the major issues identified by the report is the rapidity with which change is taking place in South Asia. Policymakers and practitioners operate in an environment where the unexpected is the norm. Policy and responses have to be constantly updated to ensure that we do not apply 20th century solutions and mindsets to 21st century problems. The Director General made a reference to the democratic upsurge in many countries. This is one of those 21st century issues. And if we are to have any kind of influence, I believe in brief, we can best influence this trend by being an example, rather than by trying to make any kind of policy prescriptions in the neighborhood. We also have to be mindful of the fact that South Asia does not exist in isolation. This year marks 2 decades of India's engagement with the ASEAN, and a commemorative summit will be held in New Delhi in December. It also marks 20 years of India's policy of building greater connections with Central Asia. Our exceptionally close ties to the Gulf region and to the GCC in particular need no elaboration. We are also trying to build an Indian Ocean littoral community. Our engagement with all these regions is progressing rapidly, and it is apparent that many of the problems and opportunities presented in this report need not just a South Asian perspective, but have to be seen from a trans-regional angle. We would like our policy towards South Asia and towards these regions to present a seamless continuum. The document ends by declaring that South Asia is at a crossroads. We are presented with threats and opportunities, strengths and weaknesses. It is identifying these and suggesting a policy framework to address them that this report has added value to the ongoing discourse on improving linkages within South Asia. The recommendations of the report about the broadening of India's foreign policy approach are being examined seriously and will be taken on board in our internal deliberations. I would like to conclude by noting that the Ministry of External Affairs has not been entirely reactive. We have been hearing repeatedly about how small the ministry is and how unable to cope with the challenges of our time because of its lack of resources. I'd like to say that we have not let the acute shortage of resources, which is a reality, stop entirely the effort to be more proactive. We have created bureaus within our ministry that deal with emerging issues. We have, of course, stepped up the recruitment of personnel into the Indian Foreign Service. We have also increased the intake from other services and backgrounds to build in-house expertise on non-traditional areas. I would even venture to suggest that we are probably among the ministries today with a larger mix of people from our own profession and from outside than others. We are funding an increasing amount of academic research across India on foreign policy issues. Our Public Diplomacy Division has also added to this venture and last year organized for the first time an all-India gathering of scholars and researchers in the field of international relations. We understand that domestic factors will influence policy towards our neighbors, and we have created a presence in some state capitals beyond the traditional passport offices by having branch secretariats. We have now created within the ministry a development partnership administration that will take charge of the very many development partnership programs or aid and assistance programs that we have with other countries. This administration will look into optimizing the programs that are being devised for development cooperation, particularly with our neighbors. The visa regimes and consular issues remain a major challenge for the ministry to deal with, but they are receiving our constant attention. We will continue with our efforts to be responsive to the needs of our changing nation. As the world evolves, so will we. But our first priority is, and will be for some time, the neighborhood in which we live. And that is why I think the time is right to look at how this neighborhood will evolve over the next 2 decades. And I commend the work which has been put before us. Thank you very much.